Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alan Joins, Mayor of Winston-Salem, and it's my pleasure to call to order this special meeting of the Winston-Salem City Council, acting as a committee of the whole. Thank all my colleagues up here for participating today, and ask the city clerk to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Larson.
Present. He's on.
I turned it
Councilmember Mundy.
He's on.
Councilmember Clark.
a little closer, Alan. Maybe pull it closer.
You can't.
It's just
you
audio.
You're not hearing?
Councilmember Scipio. Councilmember Larson.
Yes,
Present.
I'm here.
Okay. Councilmember Mundy.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Was that Clark?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilmember Scipio.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Here.
Councilmember Burke.
Here.
Thank you. I would remind everyone that we could have as many as 8 mics on at one time. If it's more than that, then it's going to cut somebody off. So I would just suggest to council members cut your mics on and off when you're asking to speak there. Our Sergeant at Arms tonight is, this afternoon, is Sergeant Kayla Carrollton. Over here someplace. Sergeant, thank you for being with us today. Today's agenda of the Committee of the Whole comprised of 3 parts. We're going to get a kind of an update on the current situation with regards to housing. We're going to then spend a little time talking about housing opportunities, such as the creation of a housing trust fund and maybe other strategies, and then just have a general discussion for next steps. And probably one of those next steps will be to move towards a full-blown housing summit that will probably happen in late spring or maybe even June, thereabouts. I know the staff's been working on some times on that. So this meeting is not intended as a public hearing. However, I know there's some folks who plan to say a couple words, and I will allow some very brief comments, very brief, because we've got a full agenda today. And then we'll move into discussion. So right now, we can have item G1, please.
Item G1, current housing update.
Great. Ms. Tony, are you going to take the lead, or as manager, are you going to kick us off?
I'm going to just say a few words and then turn it over to Ms. Tony. I know this is a little different format than what we're used to in terms of council. The purpose of having this here in this kind of format is to try to have more of a dialogue discussion between council and whoever is presenting. So as staff is going through, the expectation is it won't be like the traditional that they'll go through the presentation and then wait until the end to do questions. If you have things that come up that need to be discussed as we're going along, I encourage you to bring those up so that we can have that dialogue. And so that's the purpose of this, is to be a little more informal than what we typically have in the council chambers as a part of the dialogue between the various council members on this. So I encourage you to keep that in mind as we're going along to do this. And then I'll turn it over to Ms. Tony to start to kick off the item.
Assistant Manager Tony.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the City Council. Today we will give an update around housing issues, from affordable housing to homelessness, and some of the possible recommendations from our staff. And so presenting today is our Assistant Housing Development Director, Ms. Tanya Skillman, and then we'll be followed by our Neighborhood Services staff with Director Chantel McClam, Samuel Hunter, and Sharika Floyd. And so Tanya Skillman will kick us off.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee and council. I am Tanya Skillman, and we're going to begin with an overview of where we are and really our accomplishments. So we have a map here, back up a little bit, that illustrates our current pipeline. The green icons illustrate the locations of the approved projects in our current pipeline, approved pipeline, and they're in various stages of development. It represents a snapshot, certainly, of the projects that we're working on currently, as 450 units were approved by council during the last quarter. This is an additional breakdown by AMI of those units on the previous slide, where we show how we've made an impact based on area median income. The maximum, just to provide context, the maximum income limits for a family of 4 under each of these, at 30%, it's $24,450. At 50%, it's $40,750. At 60%, it's $48,900. And at 80%, it's $65,200. Next, we thought we'd show just what we have going on in our city. The Brown School Lofts was the first phase of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative for Cleveland Avenue. This project was completed. The city contributed $3.84 million for 81 units. Currently under construction is Whole Man Ministry Housing for Heroes. It's slated for completion in this summer. It's 4 units, rehab units, that'll be set aside for veterans. The city contributed to $450,000. Actually, it was the full price for rehab was $450,000 on this project. Yes.
Where were those located? I refreshed my memory.
University Avenue, University Parkway in the Northeast Ward. Then we also have Pegram Landing. Did I skip one? Mm-hmm. Yes. Habitat for Humanity. This was recently, you all approved this in November, and they've already broken ground and they're under construction. With the first 7 houses to be complete, scheduled to be complete in June, and the final in April of next year. The city contributed all of the funds for this project, $2.15 million.
A question, Ms. Skillman?
Yes.
Could you tell us on maybe starting with that one and going forward, what the percentage breakdown is between 80% AMI versus 30% AMI? I'd like to know what price range, if you will, that folks will be paying for these.
I don't have that information in front of me, though. I'm sorry about that. I can tell you that for the Home Man, well, let's start with the CNI units. They have, since it's LIHTC, they would have a mix of AMIs, typically 30% to 80%. And I'm sure that Samuel, he'll provide some more context for that as well. But that would be what you'll find as on most of the LIHTC projects.
When I did the math on our pie chart, we have 48% are at 80% or higher, and I just question if that's where we need to be to help the most people.
I agree.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Folks, if okay, could we maybe hold our questions till an end of a sort of a segment presentation and get back through it so we don't lose the flow of it? Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
I think these are targeted to 80% for Whole Man. Habitat targets at 80% as well. And then again, for Pegram, there'll be a mix of AMI, typically for low-income housing tax credit projects. But the median income typically is 60%, so whether they use income averaging, it'll average out to 60% area median income. The next slide is a breakdown of how we spent our funds specifically for some projects, for the projects in our pipeline. Council has allocated over $5.5 million in state ARPA, and just over $4.5 million remains. However, our department has these projects, the 4.4 slated for other projects, We are in current pre-development underwriting review for the projects under the 4.4 million. Next slide is the ARPA pipeline. 2.2 million, as you can see, remains from this. Again, there are projects that the city has in mind, our department has in mind for city-owned lots. And so we're working now through RFPs and with developers, and we'll be presenting these projects to council in the coming months. Do you have a question? Oh, thank you. Oh, actually, it's $50,000. We noted before, someone noted for me that we have a typo. Actually, it's $50,000 more that we have available. The sales price for 800 Spring Street was $760,000. So thank you for catching that typo, sir. Oh, yes, that's the end of my section. Would you all have a question?
Mr. Clark?
You don't need to do this today, but on both the ARPA graph and the one before the state ARPA money, those are very helpful, but I think, Ms. Tony, periodically, probably for the next few years as we progress, it would be nice to have a next call that would show status or comments or something, so we would know where all these stand. And also, as you spend the last $2 million there, and the other page, I think there's a little bit of money, continue to fill it out. But I find that very helpful. In one page, it kind of sums up where the 24 million is going. Oh.
And for the 90% who didn't hear what I said, I'm just asking that we add comment columns for this one and the previous one, and then periodically give those a couple times a year for the next few years so we can plot the progress as we go. Thank you.
Good. Councilor, Mayor Pro Tem.
Going forward, and we've asked for this periodically, if you'll go back to the slides with the AMI, nobody knows what AMI means except staff and people, some of us. I think it's beneficial if we're going to present, again, slides, that we at least provide the most information we can, whether we have to present another slide. If we're saying on that slide where you had that pie chart, I know, that one. When you do this, when we do this for the public, we can call out verbally the AMI, but the citizens need to see what that means visibly, you know what I mean, what they see. 30% AMI, I know you gave out some examples, but it would be great if when we do these charts, for what time period, like right now we're talking about in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, our MPO and everything else, this is what 30% AMI means for each one of those. Also, the addresses, as Councilmember Scipio, when she asked where was the properties, we don't always know where all of these properties are, so we always need, and even for the public, we need for them to be able to see an actual physical address and possibly even a ward where these properties are located. I'll save my other questions as we move on. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Just two quick questions. On the map at the beginning of the presentation, there is a project that looks like it's outside the city limits to the west. Is that something that we funded, even though it's outside the city limits?
Yes, sir. Beaver Landing 2.
Okay. Going forward, I would like to get a list of the projects where the 150 units that are above 81% AMI are. Okay, so on the pie chart, we show 150 units at 81% of AMI and above. If I get a listing of where those are, I'd appreciate it.
Councilman, I think based on the questions that we got, I think we're going to go back and try to give you a listing of we've got a breakdown by units, but we'll take each of the project areas and say which unit types are in each of those projects. And I think that'll answer what you're looking for.
Yeah, good.
Okay, Councilmember Scipio, then Councilmember Mundy.
Okay. Yes, I think we need to also show where we are really trying to impact economic mobility for our residents. So on the chart that shows the different properties, if you would identify those which are going to be homeowners versus rental properties. I think that would be a good thing to show.
Yes, ma'am, I can do that. All those we had up here were multifamily, were rentals.
Except for.
Except for Habitat, yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mundy?
No.
I think we make a lot of assumptions because we think we know, but we don't know. The percentage, how our population breaks out, and in comparison to what the total inventory of units in our city is, I don't know if we have more people who need 30%. I don't know if we have more people who need 80% because I don't have the numbers to compare it to. So I'm just suggesting that we take a deeper dive into availability in the market, what's currently here, versus what we need. And if we need more at 30%, that we figure out how to provide a greater incentive for developers to do 30% versus 80%. I don't think we've done that in the past. I think we've made an allotment, but we just said it had to be affordable. And I think if we need to drive that in a specific direction, we use the incentives to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember. All right, we'll take
Thank
the
you.
next presenters.
I'll set you up.
Good afternoon, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. Chantel McClam, Director of Neighborhood Services. So I'm here just to talk to you a little bit about what we can do as far as rehab and preservation of existing housing stock. Currently, we are working on somewhat of a pilot project. A few years back, you all approved 5 city-owned properties to be rehabbed, and they are going to be sold to add to our affordable housing stock, so they will have to remain affordable. And so right now, we've actually completed 3 of those homes. They're in the process of being appraised, and then we will be able to make those available to those in programs such as first-time home buyers with Forsyth County, financial pathways, folks that are going through programs that are preparing them for home ownership. I just wanted to make sure that you all were able to see the progress that we've made in several of these homes. The average cost to rehab these houses were about $75,000, but we could, in fact, use the same model, if it's effective, use the same model, and we can take homes that are possibly on our demolition list that are not at 65%. We're demolishing them because they've been vacant a long period of time. We can get those homes and we can use them in this program, rehab them with grant funding that would allow us to do so as long as we keep the housing affordable. So here you can see at the top, this is Draper Street. It's in the Northeast Ward. The top one is the before picture, the bottom is the after picture. We are showing you the outside, but we are completely rehabbing these homes inside and out. And if there's some things on the outside that may need to be updated, such as porches, driveways, we're also doing that as well. Cameron Avenue here, which is in the East Ward, you can see the stark difference between the before and after in those. Now we're going to show you what it looks like on the inside. This is 24th Street, also in the Northeast Ward, and you can see how they completely rehabbed it. They are including appliances, new and updated appliances, new and updated HVAC systems. So these are going to be some homes for those that are seeking affordable living that they're beautiful. They're doing an excellent job with this. And so these are the 3 that we have done now. We still have 2 more in this pilot project that we are working on, all in the East Ward. We've got one Golson, one on Dunbar that we're working on as well. But you're welcome to visit these homes, do a tour, and see what we're able to do with existing stock that we have in Winston-Salem. It also adds to the community, it adds to the beautification. We're not leaving a big gaping hole if we demolish, and we're providing affordable housing, which is just really hard to get developers to do. So here's some funding that we can use to go towards this project. We've got, and this is funding, this is not all of the funding that we receive from CDBG or HOME. This is funding that has not been allocated to other programs or projects. So this is funding that we can use towards rehab and preservation. The term GO bonds, Mr. Hunter is going to come up and talk to you a little bit more about that and how we want to use that around the city. But definitely CDBG and HOME, we can use. These are annual allocations that we're able to use going forward if we want to continue with rehab and preservation. I think that's the last slide for me. If you all have any questions? Concerns?
Councilmember McIntosh.
Were the properties that you showed that were completed, were they acquired through foreclosure?
They were acquired by some type of lien, either a lien that we had on for violation or foreclosure, yes.
I know that there's been talk over the years about working more closely with the county on tax foreclosures. And I think that needs to be part of our strategy moving forward. How are the contractors chosen that do the work? It's not city employees, we get outside contractors?
It's outside contractors. It would be bid out and given an opportunity to the lowest bidder to be able to rehab. And this particular project, we bid them all out at one time, and so one contractor is working on all of them. But going forward, we can bid out across any contractor that's interested and available.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Scipio.
You know, I'm always in favor of rehab and preserving what we have as opposed to just demolishing, tearing down, or letting it go. It looks like we have almost $4 million for rehab, if I'm looking at that. Is any of that available to homeowners for grants?
Yes, and that's going to be the turn that Mr. Hunter is going to talk to you about. So absolutely.
And how about special loans to landlords or outside owners?
I do not believe we have in the new regulations that we want to bring to you all for approval. We're looking at providing grants to homeowners in need, and not necessarily looking at landlords, but we can absolutely, when we bring those recommendations, we'll accept what the council recommends us to do.
I think we need to put some thought to that, because I know in the East Ward, the homes that are there, we have almost 70% of them are rental, owned by non-homeowners. And they are oftentimes the ones that are looking deplorable. Yes. And we need to figure out how do we adjust that as well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. This money that's left, or the programs, I know we have it on our website, and somehow you might see it run across 13. But right now, we're in a place where if this is not being communicated on a regular basis to all of the citizens of Winston-Salem, I know that the most blighted areas are in the east side of Winston-Salem, but there are also neighborhoods all over that people have been living in their homes that they haven't been able to upgrade or rehab because of either their employment, retired, disability, seniors, whatever. So I would hope, and I'll be asking for the marketing plan to make sure when we start talking about getting this money out, that we communicate this to the community. And as well as Councilman Clark said, I'm going to be looking in community development for updates on all of this as we move forward, so that it won't be I don't know. it'll be because I need to know.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other, Councilmember Larson, Councilmember Mundy.
Thank you for this. I'm kind of interested in how many houses the city actually owns. I'm impressed by the rehab of the Draper House, which I assume was one that we owned, and Piedmont Triad Regional Council and used their contractors to rehab that. I don't know, you mentioned there are other houses in that pipeline, 2 or 3 other houses that they're committed to do. But how many houses does the city actually own that we would be trying to bring up to standards and then put back on the private market? Do we have any idea?
I know of definitely about 9, but those were the ones that we were looking at, but some of the properties are not viable properties, and they may be taken down so that if they're side by side, the whole area can be developed. That's a list that I'm ready to look at. Do you know, Ms. Attorney Carmen?
They're not very many.
Not very many?
It's probably a moving target. I would assume that we're going to be a little more aggressive in the sense of preservation rather than demolition as we go along, as we change our attitude a little bit about rehabbing structures. The idea of rehabbing individual buildings versus larger complexes of combined housing type is going to require a separate, different approach to contractors. I mean, we've got Habitat for Humanity doing a few new houses that they're building. They also can rehab houses, presumably. We've got Piedmont Triad, which will do a half dozen or so houses. But we have the ability to hand-pick, basically, these rehab projects a little more intensive in the sense of management, probably, than a 36-unit building that's going up. Do we have the staff and stuff, the capacity to do the inspections on these buildings?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a great idea. I'm really enthusiastic about the rehab component because I think we've got some strong neighborhoods, particularly in the eastern part of the city, that have good housing stock in it. And if we can do the kind of restoration and renovation that we've done in other parts of the city there, I think we can have something to be really proud of. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Councilmember Mundy.
Could I get applications, the digital forms emailed to me? And one of the reasons I say that is I can't find them on our website, and we need to spend some money on improving our website because 9 times out of 10 I can't find what I'm looking for, and if I can't, chances are these folks who need assistance cannot either, and we make it very difficult for them.
Right, you're meaning for the TURN program. We realized that coming in that it needed a total overhaul, that we needed to market better, that we need to be less restrictive because the money's been sitting there since 2014, and so we're ready to spend it. We're going to do all of the things that you all are talking about. We realize the gaps and the issues, and Mr. Hunter's done a great job of kind of taking out all those things that were bordered, that were blocking folks from applying.
And the website itself should be one of the tools that we use to do that, but right now it's just not a very effective tool.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
My memory's not too good here, but in the TURN program, do we have a upper limit on how much we'll spend per house?
We did have a limit of $65,000 in the current regulations, yes.
Okay. 2 comments here. First off, those bottom 2 numbers are one-time money. Those are bond things and I want to say we're in 2024 right now, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow, I think. We probably won't have another bond referendum for another 2 to 4 years. The home in CDBG is yearly, but it's order of magnitude less. If you spend $75,000 a house, which is what you just spent, with all that money you can do 60 houses. We probably have 6,000 we need to do. That'll take you 100 years. We've got to come up with a plan. If we want to make a difference, we got to come up with a plan that we can do it for less than 75 of city money, and I think the right combination, and I know we're going to talk about a housing foundation later than this, but I think the answer is to come in there with some low interest loans for the homeowners, because we're only giving this to homeowners. But it sounds great till you realize it won't make a difference if it takes us 100 years, and I think 6,000 may be a very conservative number of how many houses need to be. And in 100 years, you'll certainly have more come up. Anyway, I'm the numbers man, just want to
thank
remind
you.
y'all. Thank you.
Councilmember McIntosh?
Just one additional follow-up to Councilmember Clark. So the way the money flows on this is we purchase these properties using CDBG or not turn money,
Yes.
but CDBG money.
Mm-hmm.
And then we use $75,000 on average to rehab them of CDBG money.
Yes, sir.
Then we sell them.
Mm-hmm.
That money goes back into
The program.
the program being,
It'll go back into the program in order to rehab the houses.
it's a de facto revolving fund.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next segment, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the committee of the whole. I'm Samuel Hunter, Assistant Director for Neighborhood Services. You all just talked a lot about rehabilitation and preservation of existing structures, so that's what I'm going to talk to you a little more about this afternoon. As you all know, in 2014 and 2018, in the bond referendum, you approved funds specifically for preservation of existing structures and rehabilitation. As of right now, from the 2014 GO bond money, you have a balance of $1.1 million, and for 2018, you have roughly around $1.5 million. In the 2014 bond money, it is allocated by ward, okay? So that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. And then in 2018, those funds, there's no ward allocation for those. So we have a little more flexibility on where we can spend those funds. Currently, as the TURN program reads, it puts a 10 to 20 year lien on someone's home when they apply and get approved for that loan. We're in the business of promoting economic mobility. So when we come back to you all in April, we're going to bring some new guidelines that are less restrictive and more open for people to apply for this. There's going to be less barriers regarding area median income. So right now you have to be below 50% of the area median income, and we know that a lot of people that receive disability, pension, sometimes their income is above 50% AMI. So making sure that we can increase the AMI threshold so they can still apply to get some funding for their home. The remaining funds will be used to provide the low barrier loans for owner-occupied units only, okay? And then so to the same tune of that, something that we're administering right now is the facade improvement program. That is fully funded through the Choice Neighborhood Initiative that we received in 2019. And we have $895,000 allocated specifically for owner-occupied rehab in the specific Choice Neighborhood target area. Of that $895,000, $391,000 has been committed to these homes right now. We have contractors working on homes as we speak today. It's going very smooth. The program is exterior only and is also making a better curb appeal in some of those areas as well. So making sure that people can benefit from the entire transformation of the Choice Neighborhood Grant. So what you all will be seeing in April, again, we're going to be coming back to you with another TURN guideline revision so you all can understand. We'll go a little more in depth about that. We're going to talk about how we're going to market it, how contractors are selected, how we're making sure that this is an inclusive program for everyone in these specific areas to benefit from. So in addition to cleaning up owner-occupied units, our department has a community engagement division. And so when we're engaging with these citizens, making sure that they understand what's going on, making sure that they can collaborate with their neighbors, and they can have a specific city department to come to when they want to organize and put on community meetings. So we have a neighborhood association engagement tool where people can reach out to us and say, hey, they would like to establish a neighborhood association, or if they haven't established a neighborhood association, they can benefit from the services that the city provides, such as knowing about code enforcement, knowing about some of the funding that we do have available for owner-occupied rehabilitation, and then also interdepartmental collaboration, working with sustainability, working with marketing to make sure that we can do things to promote livability in areas of Winston-Salem. So that's all I have. You all have any questions for me?
Any questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. Again, it goes back to how we communicate and how we bring this information to the council. We only know, again, what you all tell us. And sometimes maybe we need, it's not that we don't trust what you say, is sometimes we have to recognize that our housing department, I know you're degreed, you got your accreditations, but sometimes we need outside eyes to come in and help us also. And that's where I'm at right now, is that we got all of these things that are coming at us, and the way my brain processes information, I need to see it in a structure, in a process flow chart, and it probably comes out of my manufacturing. But that's how I understand. I think you do have a process flow chart in here of how if you here and you go here and whatever, that's how I understand it. Just, this is great information, it's information overload today.
Gotcha.
But it's good for the public and those that kind of can see what we're dealing with here and how it's going to be so important after today if the council votes on the Housing Summit proposal. And if we can get these things, whereas we're going to need somebody, and another outside consultant, somebody, School of Government, Grounded Solutions, Everyone's Home, Progressive, we're going to need another group that this is all they do 24/7 is housing development, the process, and put it in a format so that developers, community, bankers, institutions, staff, council understands where we at, what we doing, and how the process flows. I heard council for the past 2 years say they wanted a plan. This is part of planning is information. But at some point, as we said a year or so or 2 years ago, you've got to take the information and put it into a process plan. Other than that, we just keep getting information that's new or whatever or repetitive. So that's what I'll be asking for is also as we go through the day.
We'll get it.
Councilman Larson? Turn the mic on.
It appears that we've got 2.7 million or so in general obligation bond for turn, which is going all the way back to 2014. I'm curious, first of all, if I were interested in engaging in the turn program, or if I were interested in talking to the city about trying to rehab my house, how do we go about doing that?
For an owner-occupied structure?
For a homeowner that has a house that has a roof that needs to be repaired on it, how would they know even that turn is available to them, and what areas? Do we have mappings that show geographical areas? Do we have an index of properties that would be eligible? How is it administered? How is that turn money administered to make it accessible to the public?
Yes, sir. So the first step...
To be quite honest, I know people in my ward that have been trying to get into the turn program for some years now, and it's been very difficult because of staffing problems and other institutions. So what I'm curious about is why I asked you earlier about programs of rehab, or do we have the staff in order to implement the programs that we desire to do? Because my understanding is we've had real problems with turn, getting the inspectors and getting the administrative part of this program up and running properly.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we do have staff in place to administer home inspections. We have contractor advisors, construction advisors in place. We do have our lending team is almost fully staffed. So we do have staff in place to administer these programs that are going forward. How people will really get involved and figure out how to apply for these, first step is contacting staff, calling our department and saying that they're interested. We do have maps available for the public to look at to determine if their home is in the specific turn area. We've also been working with the planning department to make sure that there is a layer on the data viewer so people can go directly to that and plug in their address to see if they're in the turn area. So we've been coming up with some more formulas for marketing this. Again, this is something that's going to be, we're trying to revamp this program. We know we had issues in the past. Staff has been working on this for probably about the past 4 to 5 months now, trying to think through how we can market this, how we can bring new contractors on board, how we can protect city staff, and how we can also protect the homeowners during this process. We knew that staff and homeowners were experiencing some hardships with some of the contractors, so making sure that we're very selective with those contractors and making sure that we get the job done right.
Well, I'm a strong believer in turn program, and I continue to support it. It's just that I think we go back to what Mayor Pro Tem recently said. We got to market this stuff, let people know that is available to them and how they access it, get through that door to try to use this funding. And you're talking about individuals, you're not talking about developers or contractors or people that are investing in property on rental and absentee landlords particularly. We're talking about individual homeowners that need work on their houses and to bring them up to standards. And this is a one-on-one person who probably doesn't ever want to engage the city any more than they have to probably, but they need to do this. So I really think it's important that we have a marketing program through even through water bills or something that says there are home renovation programs available within the city. Contact you or whoever.
Yes, sir.
And let's see if we can get some of this money out the door soon.
Yes, sir. We'll have a full game plan for you when we come to April committee.
Yeah, Councilmember, if, what Samuel said earlier is the intent is to come back in April with some specific changes and marketing of that term program so they can identify what barriers people have been seeing in the program. And I can't speak to what happened in the past, but looking at what barriers that they're currently seeing and how we might change the program so that y'all can get this funds out to those people that need it in the community. So expect that to be on your April committee meetings, a more in-depth discussion of how we're going to, or how we would propose revamping the term program so that you can see more activity just like you're asking for.
Terrific, thank you.
Councilmember Scipio and then Councilmember Mundy.
Yes, Mr. Hunter, thank you. I know you've worked hard since they put you in this position. The whole department has come back strong. We want it to be successful. Couple of questions I have for the TURN program that I hope we will not, in the process that we are creating, that we don't have the same errors that we made before. One being the length of the process, from application to start. People have waited over a year. That's unacceptable. People were denied after waiting for a year. That's unacceptable. There was also some confusion around the loans being forgivable. And I hope that gets clarified because there are people who are believing that they've been paying on those loans for 10 years and at some point they were supposed to be forgiven. So that's a real problem. The other issue is around choice. With the facade program, we have almost $400,000 left to be allocated. I don't believe we have had enough homeowners applying for that, have we?
Oh, yes, we have.
Okay.
So that was broken down into 2 phases. So right now we're in phase 1. We have 21 applicants that have been selected for phase 1. So that's where that 391 is for the first phase. We have the additional $400,000 that's going to be in the second phase. Once we get done with phase 1 of these homes, then we'll do phase 2. We already have applicants in the pool. They submitted them late last year, so we have all the applicants. We have over 45 applications total. So we do have enough applicants. We do have enough interest for this program.
Do we have an idea of when we might be starting phase 2?
Yeah, so like I said, phase 1 is, they're working on homes right now as we speak. We're looking at roughly a 2-month turnaround on these homes for phase 1. So once they get done, we're going to start phase 2. So we're looking probably at a June start date for that, just to be safe.
Okay, that sounds great. And one last question. It has nothing to do with housing, but there's also in the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, the commercial facades. Do we have an idea of when we're going to start that program?
Yes, ma'am. So I've been in early talks with some engineering firms talking about developing a streetscape plan for North Liberty Street. So that's a very lengthy process to make sure that, you know, when they do develop the streetscape plan, is something that we can implement in a timely manner, because this money does have an expenditure date on them as well. So just making sure that when the architect and engineering firms develop this plan, we can go ahead and start the implementation process. So to answer that question, fingers crossed we can have a streetscape plan by the end of this year and begin implementation at the beginning of 2025.
And that give us enough time to spend those funds?
Yeah, that'll give us enough time to spend the residential funds, but we have a bank for commercial funds as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Mundy?
Do you know if this list of current neighborhood associations has been shared with the CALs, with the community liaisons?
It should be.
It'd be very helpful, so
Yes.
if it hasn't, could you check on that and make sure that they
Absolutely.
get, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
And this is a question for anyone who can answer us. We talk about AMI a lot. Who sets that? How is it calculated? How often is it calculated? Is that something that we do? Is it something that the county does? I know what it is and how we use it, but I don't know the backstory.
Yeah, so HUD calculates that, and they do that on an annual basis. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development does that on an annual basis. They do an evaluation, and then they set those limits. Angela, do you know?
I was going to say,
Cut it off.
I just sent to you all the chart that I emailed in February with that information on it, so you should have it handy in your Outlook box.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, let's go to the next segment, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor Allen Jones, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and City Council. I'm Sharika Floyd, Housing Programs Manager with the Neighborhood Services Department. I'm going to review with you the status of our current support for those experiencing homelessness. So the chart that you have here shows the sheltered populations versus the unsheltered populations. So it shows how many people have been enrolled in emergency shelter services and street outreach over the past 5 years. And enrollment in street outreach does not count the number of individuals that have refused services. This only counts the number of individuals who have agreed to services for engagement, case management services, or basic referrals. The chart shows that there has been an increase over the last 5 years in our street homeless population and an increase as well in the last 3 to 4 years in our emergency shelter population. This encampment map shows encampments as of December 2023. It shows 270 encampment locations around the city of Winston-Salem. The city of Winston-Salem has a collaborative team approach. We partner with the Neighborhood Services Department, which includes code enforcement, and the Housing and Community Services staff, partners with Winston-Salem Police Department, the lieutenants around the area, as well as the BEAR team to provide services to those who are experiencing homelessness. Code enforcement works with us. All these departments work collaboratively in encampment cleanup processes, as well as in connecting with individuals who are living in unsheltered populations. The encampment cleanup process, encampments are usually reported via CityLink, Winston-Salem Police Department, or to Neighborhood Services through the code enforcement or find an encampment on the End Homeless website. From there, the code enforcement officers visit the encampment and they submit violations if there are trash violations. The street outreach team, in partnership with BEAR, arrives to the encampment within 72 hours. BEAR goes if there is some mental health concerns, and they offer supportive services and emergency housing options that are available. From there, the code enforcement officers, they site the property and they contact the owners to notify them via phone and via letter of the encampment. Street outreach staff from code enforcement and Winston-Salem Police Department go to the encampment on the day of cleanup. In the time from the encampment being cleaned and the notice to the owner, street outreach is continuing to go out to offer services. On the day of the cleanup, both street outreach teams and Winston-Salem Police Department and whatever contractor is in place to clean up the area arrives, notifying individuals that the encampment will be closed. On city and state-owned property, no trespassing signs are posted, and depending on the cleanup, contractors are required to remove hazardous materials in large encampment areas. Current needs for our local homeless system: increase local agency staff capacity, so more staff to do the frontline work, and a better pay to keep people engaged in doing the work. Affordable housing for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing funds. The city currently receives allotments for housing choice vouchers as well as rental assistance. A large population that we serve qualify for those rapid rehousing dollars. So those are usually individuals who maybe lost a job or they couldn't make ends meet for a month, the rent went up. So we do have a large population that can be supported with those rapid rehousing funds once they experience homelessness. Our permanent supportive housing funds, which are usually in housing choice vouchers or project-based units, those support individuals who are usually chronically homeless, so they've been homeless for long periods of time, or they have a disability. So they have those two things happening at one time. So we need to find housing opportunities that will increase the ability for us to use our rapid rehousing rental assistance funds and housing choice vouchers funds to be spent. Homeless prevention funding, so budgeting city funding to prevent households from becoming homeless, so being able to capture those households before they actually experience homelessness, to keep them housed and provide case management, budgeting services, and things like that to help them stay housed for longer periods of time. Increase the development of interim housing, so interim housing is also known as emergency shelter. So finding shelter opportunities for families and single women. We currently have one family shelter and only about 20 beds locally for women. So finding additional shelter opportunities for families and single women, as well as the elderly, which we're seeing a growing population of. And creation of non-congregate shelter opportunities for those with high barriers and other options like safe parking. And then improve our coordinated entry system. We had a lot of this information and our needs came from a report that we had done by a team from California called Homebase. The city council approved for us to bring them in. And one of the things that they pointed out was no one knew where to go when they were experiencing a crisis. So we are currently in the process of identifying a CES lead. We're hoping to do that collaboratively with our local agencies and identify a one-stop location that can be used as a hub for homeless services. That way we can bring in partner agencies, not only our local service providers, but places such as mental health service providers, physical health providers, all in one location to provide services. And then supportive services. Wraparound services that keep people housed, so strengthening our relationship with Forsyth County, DSS, behavioral health, increasing our in-kind opportunities for mental health and substance abuse providers so that we don't have to pay for those out of pocket, and increase and strengthen those wraparound services available for clients. So we follow a housing first model, believing that everyone is eligible for housing and is ready to be housed. But in order for that to work, we have to have those wraparound services in place for once they enter housing. So once they enter housing, still having that peer support, substance abuse, mental health services, budgeting services, life skill classes, employment classes available for them while they're in housing. Opportunities for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing funds. So these are just some examples of things that we can do with these permanent housing and these permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing funds that we receive on an annual basis. So this is a building 500 Wachovia Street in the Northwest Ward. Acquisition only is $483,000. There are existing floor designs available for multifamily housing. So looking at this, making this a rapid rehousing opportunity for maybe single individuals. So they'll receive rental assistance to rent out these units for a short period of time. Scattered sites and multifamily rehab. So for units, this is a twofold. So HUD has pushed a huge initiative to do more scattered sites to utilize rapid rehousing funds. So if units are in need of rehabbing those units and then placing them under the city's Housing Justice Act on rent amounts, and then providing assistance to the individuals who will rent those units and rapid rehousing fund, rental assistance funds. The ownership will stay with the landlord. The city will only provide the funds for the rehab, which will put it under the City's Housing Justice Act, and then provide the clients to maintain those units. We also are looking at this without the rehab, so finding locations where the units are in good condition and being able to provide rental assistance for the units so that tenants can move into those units, and we'll be able to have ongoing access to units to utilize our federal grant funds. And then permanent supportive housing opportunities, we're looking at more of a project-based initiative moving forward. So currently we've used a majority of our funds, 90% of our funds, on housing choice vouchers. Right now, housing choice vouchers aren't very great at being utilized. There's not a lot of owners in the system who are willing to accept vouchers. So if we had project-based vouchers, which are tied to the unit instead of the tenant, we would have access to ongoing units. Currently, permanent supportive housing opportunities, there has been a lot of work done in converting commercial spaces into permanent supportive housing opportunities, having shared spaces and having kind of the single unit styles for individuals. So places have done hotels, motels, warehouses, old school buildings and things like this. This is 790 Northeast 21st Street in the Northeast Ward, and the acquisition alone is $1.7 million. And it's 75,000 square feet, so we know that the rehab costs will be pretty significant. And then this is an example of interim housing, non-congregate. So non-congregate shelter or interim housing allows individuals with higher barriers to be able to receive services. So some of our shelters have 100 beds in a congregate setting, so they're all in one room. This doesn't work for those who have mental health needs. So having options as FODM, where we, on March 4th, they came to give a presentation to some of our city council members, and we were told that we can add roofs and other things on these to make them look more appeasing. So they provide collapsible units that can be deployed and set up with ease, and these units begin at 156 square feet. They can also add bathrooms, mini kitchens, and things like that. But cities such as Greensboro are using similar units, which they instead went with pallet shelters for temporary housing for 6 months. Staff has been meeting with the city of Greensboro just to learn about some issues that they've had, also some successes that they've had, and what they feel best will work for the city of Winston-Salem if we were to decide to do this moving forward. That's all I have.
Any questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
No questions, just a comment. A few of the council members were there at the demonstration. I think Councilmember Burke, Councilmember McIntosh, myself. I found this very interesting, and I communicated that as such, that when we think of supportive housing or permanent supportive housing, we have to get out of the box that it's going to actually be a brick and mortar building. And we've already seen across the country how innovative concepts like this are making some kinds of inroads, whether in San Francisco, Greensboro, Charlotte, or wherever. I think Winston-Salem, we need to step up our A game again and get out of the box and start thinking of things of what is it that people need right now where they are. And it doesn't mean taking 10 years to build a house. I'm okay with all of that, if everybody wants to do that. But ideas like this initiative will help us to be able to house people immediately where they are. I told you that, I told the representative that, the council members, we somewhat agreed that we need to seriously look at this. I know, where's Mr. King? I know that it will require zoning initiatives, Attorney Carmen, legal issues of setting up temporary housing versus the zoning, but I ask the council and citizens to please go out and start studying the necessary information that we all need to better understand that NIMBY and not being in my neighborhood and backyard and all of that stuff, when you got, how many encampments did we say we had?
270.
200 and something encampments. Now, just because it's not near you right now, it's coming to a neighborhood near you. So we need to start thinking forward versus thinking being stuck. I thank you for bringing Foldham here for us to be able to see it up close and personal.
Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio?
Thank you for the presentation. Could you go back to your slide that talks about sheltered population versus unsheltered population? I was looking at the trend on the emergency shelter. Do we have an explanation why during COVID these numbers went down?
The number of beds went down during COVID.
Did some of our shelters close?
No, but the number of beds, because of the 6 feet rule, we had to lower the number of beds in some of the emergency shelters.
Oh, we had to have more space in the
Yes.
shelters. Okay. Do we have any clues as to why it's trending up for homelessness right now?
The lack of housing is what we have seen. With meeting with HUD, doing housing studies, the lack of housing is what we have seen. We have funds for rental assistance. We have housing choice vouchers, but there's nowhere to spend those funds or nowhere to use those vouchers if the units are not affordable.
Councilmember Mundy?
Everything Mayor Pro Tem said and more. We've got to do more. I think our city culture has been, over the last 3 years that I've found, is how can we say no? I've never heard anybody work with me on how can we say yes, but we can find a law or we can find a zoning regulation that keeps us from helping people. Zoning is something that we do. It's something that we approve. And if other cities can do it, we can. And I think to use the rules that we made up ourselves is the reason for not helping people is the worst possible thing we could do. The other thing I want to ask about is I have heard from across the board, no matter where you are, that the COC is not working. It is broken, yet we're continuing to use a broken system. How do we fix that?
So from our COC assessment, we are doing a complete rehaul of the COC. So the COC structure changed actually this month. The COC governance charter has been updated as of this month. There are new COC leaders. We have also a new CES. So our current CES is going to be ran by United Way until June 30th. Effective July 1st, there'll be a new coordinated intake lead. And that is like the triage of services. So being that front door, also being the individuals who give out the referrals and match people to housing. So there has been a complete rehaul of the COC.
Good, thank you.
Councilmember Clark?
A question to comment, and I'll just take 2023, the 1455 number for sheltered, is that a point in time or a cumulative number for the year?
That's a cumulative number.
Cumulative number?
Yes.
Okay. Second question, or second comment question, if we were to shut down a homeless encampment with 15 people in it tomorrow, do we have enough beds that they could go to?
No, not right now.
Yeah. I get folks call me all the time and say, why don't you shut down these encampments? And my response, and I think I'm correct here, is that, well, where do you want them to go?
Yes.
And that seems to be the problem. So they just got to go set up another camp somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, will Mr. Mundy, to take a bit of retort to your comment, this council voted 6-2, and I voted for it to deny 600 houses to be built 2 months ago. So, and you voted against it as well. So be careful who you point the finger at, because we did a big no the other day on affordable housing in this council, and I was one of them. Thank you.
Councilmember McIntosh?
So I want to go back to the Foldham, the temporary shelter things. We were, I think, very impressed when we saw these, and the economics of this allow us to do more quickly, because cost and speed are vital in this. So we were very impressed by that. Greensboro will be a good We talked about this while we were there. Greensboro will be a good operation to go look at. They've been doing this. Theirs, I think, are for temporary housing. To use these as permanent housing, we will need support from the state legislature.
Yes, they don't meet the size requirements right now for permanent housing. Speaking with the Fodem design team, there are possible options, but it will increase the cost.
So I just want to remind council, Wednesday night, we're having dinner with the state legislature here in Winston. So that's something for us individually and collectively to ask our folks for. We'll face the same kind of opposition on where we put these as we have faced with tiny houses, other supportive housing things. It's up to us politically to find a solution that allows this to work. The cost per unit is about $10,000 per side.
Yes.
Right, about 20 grand a pop.
Yes.
Which is far cheaper than we can build other housing. But the other costs that we have to take into consideration is congregate, bathing, and kitchen facilities, et cetera. So there's more involved in it, but it does seem like a rapid response opportunity for us. We don't have to go build entire houses. These things set up quickly. But we do have challenges as far as where we're going to put them.
Yes, and city staff met with the facilities that can be on site, so we contacted Greensboro to figure out what they were doing. And a laundry, shower, bathroom truck that meets the number of people that we're looking to house is it's about $93,000 to buy full out.
Right. Thank you.
Good. Councilman Burke?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Floyd, for providing this information. My questions are regarding the Fodem housing options as well. I did go to the fairground. I did have an opportunity to take a look. So you had mentioned that Greensboro had some issues. What kinds of issues did they have?
So they went with a different provider and design, which is the pallet shelter. So they have had issues with the sturdiness, the heating, also with the, you remember anything else? Oh, and then a notification of closing. So when they are ending their 6 months right now, what they're doing is they'll finish at one location at 6 months. They'll close that location down, pack them up, and move them to another location. They usually give about 14 days notice. When we met with them, they were given about a week's notice to the tenants or the clients that they would need to move. So that was a little of the feedback that they've gotten back is those type of issues. City staff were looking at whatever the service provider is for these units, is that there's continued case management and that there's continued reminders and housing opportunities presented to the individuals in these units. So at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, there's still reminders of this is how much time that is left. Here's additional opportunities that we can provide you, support you in housing. So we wanted to make it a very whole person approach and provide those wraparound services ongoing each week in order to secure them permanent housing moving forward, which is what we looked at. And then also looking at these units versus the pallet shelter units. These units have seemed to be more sustainable than those that they have.
Couple of questions, thank you. So am I understanding correctly that these can only be placed for a 6-month period and then they have to be moved after 6 months?
Yes.
Okay, and are these only placed during the colder months or?
No, so they can be placed in extreme weather. So as Greensboro has a winter shelter, and then they also use this for their summer program. So it's very hot in the summer, it's extremely cold in the winter. So at 6 months, the 6-month timeline starts over once you move a unit. So you'll put a unit up for 6 months. You'll, before taking that unit down, once they move out, you'll clean the unit, make sure there's no maintenance needs, things like that, move the unit, and the timeline of 6 months starts over.
Okay, and then each time the units are moved to another location, we've got to have hookups for water, electricity. We've got to have that in place wherever we move the units. How difficult will that be?
So we met with the engineer that did this for the city of Greensboro, and the total cost of that was about $45,000 the first time, but it wasn't expensive at all. And that was, they got approval from the board.
I'm sorry, about $45,000 to hook up for the Foldums for each location?
So, yes, and that's the complete wiring and build out of the entire location. They use the ball field. So their ball field was about $45,000. And they have more units than we do. So we're looking at these units, which are double-sided. So there's a private room on each side, which meaning we wouldn't need more than 10 or 15 units.
And I think, I just wanted to clarify for Ms. Burke, they do not have water and sewer to each individual unit. They do have power to them, but you have to have some kind of structure there with water and sewer to it, where they would have bathrooms and showers and those things. So when they tear those down, they have to run power to each one and take the power up, but each location has to have a congregate area for folks to go to.
Thank you for that clarification, because when we viewed these last week, I noticed that the ones that we viewed did not have a bathroom, shower area for the residents. And then the last, it's not a question, it's a statement. I noticed your example for supportive housing. One of the examples was 790 Northeast Liberty Street.
Yes.
I just want us to really remember that we have more than plenty of supportive housing in the eastern part of the city. And with our affordable housing justice ordinance, we have taken a lot of time to really focus on diversifying the housing stock throughout the city. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you.
Councilmember Larson?
Go back to 500 Wachovia Street. I think it's an interesting case. I've been watching that building. It's actually in the South Ward, not in the Northwest Ward. I've been watching that building for dozens of years now, and it sits there. It's a product of a changing economy where you have a corner store supporting a neighborhood that's pedestrian-based, and maybe people living upstairs and then people doing grocery shopping and stuff downstairs. And as the economy changed, that building became obsolete. And the question is now what happens to it? It's a good-looking building, part of the neighborhood, it's always been part of the identity of it, and yet we haven't been able to find a use for it. Part of the problem is that we rely on the automobile so much in our economy that we can't find parking for this kind of building. And I'm hoping that the zoning people and the inspections and whatever will find ways to allow us to insert modern use into the building without the parking requirements that are so rigid that neighborhoods go crazy and a building can't be reused. It would be a good building for about 4 units. I believe it's been rezoned now to do that, but at a price of basically almost $500,000 for the building itself in its current condition. It's not likely that anything's going to happen, and whether the city's willing to intervene in behalf of trying to free it up and make something go with that, almost having to take it under control itself. I don't see anything going to happen with that building. The economics just don't work for affordable housing to go into that kind of location with that kind of startup price, and then the rehab that would go with it would be probably another $500,000 or so. So I think looking at that as an example of something we all think needs to be done, but the economics don't work at it right now, and we're going to have to figure out a way, if the city's interested, it's got to figure a way to subsidize it to make it happen. It's not going to happen otherwise.
All right, thank you. Well, it appears we've finished this first section, Ms. Tooney, and now move to the housing opportunities, things of that nature. Okay. Councilmember Scipio had a great idea. Let's take about a 5-minute break. 5 minutes. I'm gonna gavel us back in at 3:20. Council members.
Give us a break, and they don't know how to come out.
I said 5, knew it'd be 10. All right, thank you so much. So, Ms. Tony, are you going to kick off this next session on housing opportunities?
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you. Part 2 is housing opportunities. We heard a little bit about and celebrated a little of the accomplishments of housing development. Now we want to enter into what are our opportunities, what are our funding sources, and how can we look at housing differently to potentially include a housing trust fund. So Tanya will kick us off, and then we'll hear a little bit from self-help. Mr. JJ will present in a second. So Tanya.
Thank you, Patrice, Ms. Tony. So in this second portion of our presentation, I think we wanted to all acknowledge that we understand that there is a need in this current market for innovative strategies to make an impact. Whether those are removing policy and process barriers to housing development that allow for more equitable access, and by raising substantial funds to support acquisition and development. Also, I think in this type of discussion, it's necessary to acknowledge that a collaborative effort is needed by the local, private, and public stakeholders in our community to implement different tools and policies in funding resources. This next slide I have here is an overview of the funding available currently. We all know and hear about federal funding available, the HOME, which and CDBG, which were mentioned previously. We also have access to HUD 108 loans, which provides communities with source of low-cost, long-term financing for economic and community development. From my understanding is we haven't really utilized this, but staff is interested in finding ways to work that in for our city. And so we're analyzing the best possible use of those resources. We discussed the city funding available, and that's ARPA and the state pipeline and the state ARPA pipeline. The Housing Finance Assistance Fund, which has about $2 million. But we know that the 6.7 of ARPA, collective of ARPA, and the 1.2 million are not funds that will be replenished. Once they're gone, they're gone. And we also include the city-owned lots in that, and consideration for subsidizing through below-market conveyance of the city-owned lots for affordable housing. Next, we hear at the bottom here the funding opportunities. Considerations, which Councilmember Clark mentioned, would be a bond referendum or a property tax designation. And finally, the Housing Trust Fund. It is, I think, of most interest to us right now, and we have J.J. Freylock here to, well, let me take a step back. If anyone had any questions about this before I introduce.
On the funding opportunities?
2026 bond referendum.
I think that was supposed to come out.
I respect my colleague, but we know that Winston-Salem hadn't had a bond referendum in 20 plus years when we decided, this council, to have one in 2014. And then, yes, it was so successful because we did what the citizens asked us to do. Don't, promise us something and you don't deliver. That's for every part of Winston-Salem. We were so successful, we did it again in 2018. We thought we were going to be able to do it in 2023, and they told us, the financial people, that we couldn't do it. They said, well, maybe 2024, 25. 2026, I'm just saying that we need to, the council will have to argue and debate and agree, whatever, to do that. I believe that 2026 is, we need to move it 2025 or something. And therefore, it's not on a off-year election of, the 2 years after the presidential. But I think, Mr. Manager, we need to be looking at 2025. And I know Councilmember Clark is Chair of Finance, but I also need us to understand that if we keep pushing this back, based on the success we had in 14 and 18, I think the citizens, we need to do exactly what we did the last time, put it out for the citizens to decide, and we follow up with action. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it's the citizens' problem. It's the advice we got from our bond counsel that we could potentially lose our AAA bond rating if we went too soon. So, but I agree with you, Mayor Pro Tem. We've got some major needs here that the only way we can do it is with the bond issue. So, any other thoughts? Ms. Clark?
We can check on this, but I think there may be a state law now that restricts when you can have a vote on them. You can't have a vote in an off year on a Saturday night when no one's paying attention. I believe they have to be in even years. So, yeah. And for you non-math majors, the next even year is 2026.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mundy.
Just a brief comment, and not to change the focus, but we need to be talking about how to reduce the number of people who are homelessness, not how we're going to house 500 people 5 years from now. So I don't think it necessarily falls squarely on your shoulders, but we need to be looking at bringing those numbers down and maybe set some goals over the next 4 to 5 years. How do we bring those numbers down, and what should they be? Because if you measure it, it's more likely to get done.
Thank you.
I also point out that you mentioned the 108 loan program. The city at one time used that fairly regularly. Years ago, the council over indicated. So it's a good tool. We just hadn't had the right mix, I think.
Very good. I'll be working with Attorney Carmen to find out more about that.
Okay.
Thank
Let's
you.
move forward.
So we have J.J. Freylock here from Self-Help Credit Union to discuss more about the Housing Trust Fund. He's our resident expert, and he can also give us some insight into what some of the other cities are doing. Thank you. Mr. Freylock.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and other members of the council, thank you for welcoming me back again. This is very good to be back in your community. Every community has their unique strengths and unique needs, and self-help is really here in as much a learning posture as we are to share our experiences. But the one thing to take away is that an affordable housing loan fund is a flexible tool that can grow and adapt to your community's needs over time. So with that, I'll try to tailor the presentation. I'll streamline a little bit here too. There's some slides that are informational in here that may be helpful, and please welcome to stop me if you'd like to look at something. But I think a lot of the setup has already been done by your talented staff members here. So these are just talking a little bit about the needs. A lot of this date back to the 2018 study, which I know has been superseded by some additional information. I think it's always helpful for me. I'm a fairly simple guy, and I like to understand, well, what's the real problem here? So looking at this from a lender perspective, when we look at conventional housing, typically there's debt and equity. So think about a loan and then cash from the developer. With affordable housing, there's not as much equity available, and the debt, you can't support as much debt, and so there's a gap. In terms of what is that gap typically filled with, it could be subordinate debt, it could be soft debt, think about city or county funds coming into it, grants from philanthropy, or tax credit equity. And there's a variety of different type of things on the right side there I've noted, including affordable housing loan funds. That gap, though, is in danger of becoming a chasm. What we're seeing is higher and higher cost of housing. Incomes, as you know, are stagnant. There's less government subsidy available, and interest rates are higher. And while that's not my fault here at Self-Help, we have higher interest rates too. And then limited lender capacity. We're seeing this right now with the real regional banking crisis in the country. And so what that leads to is you can support less and less debt, and equity is drying up as well, and so you have a larger gap, which is a chasm. And so I think when I talk to communities, I really tell them, hey, the time is now. The affordable housing challenge is coming. It's really overwhelmed some communities, and this community has an opportunity to really take the bull by the horns, as we say in Durham, and work with the affordable housing challenge. So two key challenges for affordable housing, and I'll speak kind of to development and preservation of multifamily rental, but this could be applied to other forms of housing as well. One is acquisition. There are market rate developers out there coming in with basically buckets of cash. And it's really a stiff competition for folks that are trying to either preserve or create affordable housing with properties. And so you really need ready, cost-effective financing to acquire and hold those properties, whether they're operating properties or just brownfields or land rate for development for future development. The other side is gap financing, and that's where there's programs such as the 4% low-income housing tax credit program, that's a major federal government program, and other approaches where they'll finance good chunks of the project. The project can support a little bit of debt, but then the challenge is there's that big gap that's potentially becoming a chasm. And so that's where supportive gap financing, that importantly multiplies the limited public funding that's available. The key success factors, so I'm going to jump right to key success factors on this slide, and that really, I'm not here to sell self-help as the fund administrator. We're here to serve you if we can. It's really strategic alignment of your administrator of an affordable housing loan fund with the government top loss funding or the community's other forms of top loss funding, and then with the motivation for the administrator being driven by successful deployment. You want your administrator to be motivated to get the funds out the door and get projects built. And then the other success factor is leverage of top loss investments. So if I tell folks the back of the envelope is if I get $1, self-help can raise $3 more, and we have a $4 fund, and then with that $4 fund, you can either rotate it multiple times or attract additional investment to make $20 worth of affordable housing. So that's the kind of quick math that I do. We'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about self-help's experience as an administrator. As far as the goals and challenges from the community, those are evolving over time. I think they've even evolved since I was here in August. And so hopefully you'll see this fund as a potential to solve whatever those challenges are. Oops, one slide back. I'm a visual person too, so I find this slide helpful to what do you mean by an affordable housing loan fund? So on the left of the slide, you see the investors. These are really your sources. So government certainly is a main player here, foundations and impact investors, regional employers, health systems, and then at the bottom of it, Bank Community Reinvestment Act investments. So those who aren't familiar, large banks have a requirement to invest in their communities, and they have a lot of dollars on the sidelines they're wanting to deploy, and one of those places is they can deploy it into affordable housing loan funds. So out of those sources, we really have two main needs to form the housing fund. One is top loss funds. And so to put a fine point on it, what are top loss funds? Top loss funds are funds the community is putting at risk because if the loan fund's going to go out and take some risk. And if the loan fund loses money on some of the projects and the opportunities, then those top loss funds are willing to take that risk. Now, I always tell folks self-help is very good at not losing anybody's money. But if we do have to take some risk with the fund or any administrator, they're going to need a source of top loss funds to do the more aggressive financing that these funds really demand. The other part is senior lender funds. So think about these as like the first mortgager or the senior lender. And those typically are going to be those Bank Community Reinvestment Act investments. And I'll talk to who those banks have been in the past. They're able to come in and provide low-cost, long-term capital to complement for example, the government funds and maybe the foundation funds. And what your administrator is doing, in this case, Self-Help Ventures Fund, is providing guarantees to them that no matter what happens with the fund performance, they'll get their money back. And that provides them an incentive to provide that capital into the fund. So that's the left side of the slide. The right slide is then what do you do with it? And in here I've proposed, this is gap financing here. And so you could see with kind of conventional capital, you might have some developer equity from your nonprofit, from maybe your for-profit that's developing some housing or preserving it. They'll get a first mortgage that's readily available from lenders like Self-Help Credit Union or others. We certainly don't have to be the first mortgager. And then the gap financing fills in the gap. So that's where this gap financing comes in. I talked a little bit to low-income housing tax credits. It's an important, in North Carolina, an underutilized tool, and that's where you can get as much as 50% of the project costs through these tax credits that are brought in with federal investors. You can't really support much of a first mortgage, though, because this is deeply affordable housing, and so you still have a gap financing need here. And this is a problem across the country. So I've made a similar presentation to the city of Jacksonville, Florida, so similar challenges. The next slide here, the left side looks exactly like the one on the previous slide, and that's because it is the same. You could have the same loan fund performing bridge financing, and you'd have this bridge financing, if you recall back a couple slides. This is for developers or nonprofits to be able to acquire and hold properties for future development where they might use the gap financing. And the idea is that this bridge debt is low cost, it's readily available, it goes out to acquire these properties and hold them for maybe up to 5 years, and then revolves back into the fund and is used again. So to give you just a sense of what we might propose for Winston-Salem, with what self-help understands thus far, is thinking about a $40 million 20-year fund with both the bridge financing and gap financing. Some split there between the two type of financings that would be used there. Idea of low interest 1 to 5 year terms for the bridge and low interest 15-year terms for the gap financing. On bridge financing, really wanting a developer, especially nonprofits, to be able to come in and acquire the property without any equity, without having to go out and raise money straight from the fund, and the idea that those funds are revolved quickly to do multiple projects. The gap financing is designed as long-term, and that's where these low-interest, long-term loans come in, and up to 25 or maybe even 30% of total project cost. The idea here is that if you have a $40 million fund, you could enable $120 million of project financing. I emphasize here again a flexible tool that can adapt and change to the needs of your community. And I learned a lot from the part 1 here of the different needs this community is facing. And so it's a conversation with your administrator, be it self-help or someone else, as to what that tool could be. Talked about the kind of investment and partnership here. It really is a partnership with the community. It's not an administrator coming in here to save the day. It's the administrator is someone to serve you and be in that toolkit for you. I'm glad to talk about, so what could a fund do? The answer that I know some folks have, one of the council members here has been to a competing business school of mine, and there's a lot of answers that go, it depends. So if you say, how much housing could you support? It's going to be, it depends really on the type of housing you're building, how much it costs, and really, importantly, the community you're trying to serve with it. At this point, I'll pause for a moment before I talk about self-help and our experience, just to see if there's any questions on structure of the fund. If I used any acronyms that I didn't spell out, glad to answer those.
Any questions on self-help in their outline? I think we're good.
So I mentioned here before, I'm not here to sell self-help as your administrator. Suffice it to say, we're a $5 billion community development financial institution. Our headquarters are in Durham, but we're a national organization, and we're across the state of North Carolina. And there's various things we work on between home lending, real estate, research and policy, and our retail credit unions. I'm here from the commercial lending side. A little bit about our experience. So the Durham Affordable Housing Loan Fund was launched in 2019. It was really an organic convening, really the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership. So Duke University hosted this, and then self-help really served as the hub for founding this $10 million fund. It was really our pilot fund, really focused on helping nonprofit developers acquire and hold properties. So this was the bridge financing case. So we learned a lot about bridge financing from here, a lot of different, and I'll talk to some of the opportunities that we supported with that. The second fund has been the Wake Affordable Housing Preservation Fund, and this is a fund that Wake County, exclusively for preservation, they very narrowly defined this. This was a bid for proposal, so we had a request for proposal, so we were the winning bid of at least 4 or so organizations that applied. And this is both bridge loans as well as adding gap financing. Some innovations with this fund include it's available to nonprofits, and we've also had an ability to provide some advantages to to borrowers that need non-recourse. That's a bit of a higher order topic, but we can talk about that a little bit later. The Greensboro Housing Fund, your neighbor just to the east, we launched in 2023 a $13 million fund. We plan to launch a $22 million fund, hopefully by the end of this year, so that we thought with initial tranche, let's get it out the door. This was catalyzed by the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. We were invited to come and propose a fund, and we're co-administering the fund with the National Institute for Minority Economic Development. They're deploying and my slide's in there here, an $8 million small-scale development project, and Self-Help is deploying a large-scale gap financing project. So a very different kind of approach from Wake County's request for proposal, which is a longer process. The Community Foundation's process is a very fast-moving process. We have the Town of Chapel Hill. Recently, we were awarded the Town of Chapel Hill Affordable Housing Loan Fund. That launch is expected in this year, 2024, in Q2, Q3. Interesting with this fund that really the seed was UNC Health Systems provided a $5 million tranche of funds. That's top loss capital. So that's the first time we've seen a regional employer provide top loss capital, and the town is adding some funds as well. So we expect a $20 million fund to be launched this summer. And then I put up here a prospective fund. We have a few of them, but Jacksonville, Florida, I mentioned earlier, we proposed at the Mayor's Summit a couple of years ago this fund, and they're considering how they would like to use it. It's primarily focused on using the low-income housing tax credits that are available in the state of Florida. They have a huge homelessness problem in Jacksonville, and they also have a lot of risk of existing residents being priced out of the community. So stay tuned there for Jacksonville. It really is all about the people and the properties, just kind of highlighting some results from the City of Durham's fund. That fund's targeted at, 60% area median income. We think of that as very low income, and then 80% area median income is low and moderate income. It's kind of the border of low income there. So it's targeted at renter households and homeowners. We found that many of the properties were actually serving extremely low income people, 30% area median income. In that fund so far, we're fully deployed. We fully deployed the $10 million. 243 units have been preserved. We think about 30 more will be created from some of the properties that have been acquired and held. And we're targeting 500 units over the 10-year life of the fund. The challenge with this fund is we need to grow it. And so the City of Durham, the problem continues, and we really need to grow the fund. So we're in discussions with various folks, to include Durham County, who are considering participating in the fund. Wake County, that fund, we've really just got that fund off the ground. We've preserved 62 units with the first naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA as it's called, opportunity. We're targeting 3,700 units over the 20-year life of the fund. We've got some loans closing here this month. We've had a couple loans close. We've got another one that'll hopefully close before the end of the month. So we're getting a good start. Challenges we're seeing in Wake County is really just availability of properties, giving the, I don't know the way to describe it, than the feeding frenzy as there is around properties. Just a quick snapshot on the partners. So this is the partner on the funding side. You can see governments, colleges, community foundations, and then on the bottom there you see folks like Truist and Wells Fargo, Pinnacle, First Horizon. These are banks with Community Reinvestment Act dollars that are coming in as senior lenders into this funds. Institute Capital, which is part of the National Institute for Minority Economic Development, and then Self-Help Ventures Fund. We will invest in our own funds as well if there's a gap in financing. I really not at the liberty to talk about the specific borrowers because of borrower privacy, but you can see up there it's a really wide variety. Everything from community land trust, housing trust, local nonprofits, for-profits, national nonprofit, low-income housing tax credit developers. We're talking to housing authorities, and faith-based nonprofits. So real a variety of folks. And this is my last slide, just with connections here. So as you folks have additional questions, I hope that's the beginning of a conversation. Glad to have more conversations with anyone that'd like to learn more. So with that, your questions.
Good. Jim, just a quick question. You see some of the sizes of the funds, 13 million, 10 million, up to larger numbers. Seems to me there's an economy of scale. It's really so much legal issues to work through. It seems you've got to have a minimum of 30 or 40 million to really make the numbers work.
That's correct, and that's why I suggested $40 million. That's the same thing we've suggested to Jacksonville, really not varying the size of the fund by the community, but a $40 million fund is enough to get a really good pipeline going, and then to adapt, because you'll probably in a couple of years need to adapt the fund, and you'll have those dollars ready to go rather than have to go back to the well again. So I think $40 million is the right number. We started with a significantly lower amount in Greensboro because we're both sharing the fund dollars, sharing the fund with Institute Capital, and also because the Community Foundation had money ready to go at that point, and we thought let's get these important impact investments out in the community. The City of Greensboro was ready to go with the Institute Capital, and so we thought let's get the initial fund out the door. But you're right, the economy of scale really comes from looking at least $20 to $40 million.
Thank you. And in terms of the approval process, is there a local advisory board, loan approval board that works with you? And
so it varies. Now with Self-Help's model, and what we find that both the communities and the senior lenders really like is that Self-Help is already a lender. So we have a shop, we have a very rigorous, robust underwriting program. And so because we're taking risk at Self-Help to guarantee the senior lenders, we require that we work with the community to develop the box in which we're lending. And as long as we stay within that box, then Self-Help is an independent underwriter. And that does a couple things. One, it helps us to manage our risks. But remember, we're motivated to get the funds out the door because we're only able to cover our cost if we're actually relending that money out. So it covers our costs, but then importantly for the community doesn't have to pick winners and losers. Anyone can apply to the fund, and then self-help can do that independent underwriting decision. And the Community Reinvestment Act investors from the large banks, the same thing. They don't have to get into the deal-by-deal process. That's self-help's job. And so that's the model we've used. There are other models out there, but that's the one we've really used it. To your point, Mayor Joines, if we want to operate outside the box, then there's a couple approaches. In Durham, we check with the city of Durham, that's the top loss funder. We'll check with them and say, hey, we have something that's a little bit different than what we've done in the past, but we think it's in the spirit of the fund, and to make sure it fits good stewardship of taxpayer dollars. With Wake County, they have a formal exceptions committee, and that has members from both the city of Raleigh and Wake County, because they're both top loss funders. And we'll go to that exceptions committee to see, for example, if a self-help affiliate has an opportunity to do a really great project in the city, or the county, will want to go to before that exceptions committee and get their permission to make sure that it's okay with them. Or if we have a slightly different use for the fund, we'll go to that exceptions committee. The key, I think, is to have a fast process. Whatever it is, it's understood how it works, and that exceptions committee, if there's such a formal committee stood up, understands its real role.
Good. Thank you. Other questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
Could you go back to the slide with the matrix on it that shows the different housing trust funds as to their setup, community, corporate?
Oh, okay, I think this was in the...
Was that in another
Was this in the previous, where the city of Greensboro and Wake County?
Yeah.
I don't have that in my deck. Can we go to the different, should I go forward?
The presentation earlier, the one you did? No, previous? It showed the comparison side to side of Greensboro, Durham, Raleigh, whatever, so he could see this for me, please. Yeah.
Jamie's gonna upload it for me, maybe. Can you upload the next?
It's like an Excel sheet.
It's slide 4 of 6 of the previous presentation. Benchmark.
There we go, yeah,
Benchmark data.
there we go. There we go.
That one?
Yes.
We haven't seen that.
Oh, I thought.
Yeah, that's coming up next.
I saw it.
Yeah.
Could you comment on, as you said earlier, about the oversight and the examples that you provided for us, like Winston-Salem, hypothetically, third-party administrator, I guess that would be self-help?
Sure, so the oversight, Mayor Pro Tem?
Could be. When it got down to the part where it says the government side, when you look at all of the other cities, and the question was asked, or you commented about, the mayor did advisory committees. Mm-hmm. How do you, again, just a few comments, how do you get the community to be a part of this? I just think it's so important in the world we live in now. If we're not allowing the people that we serve or the people that pay the bills to be a part of the process, especially everybody knows about housing, the crisis we're in. So if you could elaborate on that or your experience with any type of advisory committees or anything else again.
Sure. So as self-help as a potential administrator, we really rely on the community to investigate what the community's needs are and then to pull together what their goals are. I think one of the biggest mistakes, and our CEO, Martin Neeks, will often say we need to avoid being bureaucratic arrogance. So we don't want to come in and say, hey, we're here to help and we know the solution for you. So we're really in a learning posture with each community to make sure that that community has understood its needs through its elected officials or its foundation. So in Greensboro, the Community Foundation was really convening a lot of that community as well. So that is the really important work that a community does up front before inviting us in to consider being an administrator of your affordable housing loan fund. So on the front end, it's that community work and that community, it's the challenging process to try to figure out what is it and what's the right approach, and then what do we have? What do we have in terms of resources that we're willing, be good stewards of the taxpayers' resources we're willing to put in. So that's on the front end. A bit to the mayor's question too of what's the oversight like. We haven't had experiences yet with funds where there is like an advisory committee kind of managing the fund. That has been proposed in a couple communities. Where I would see the role of advisory committee being very successful is we do quarterly reporting and typically an annual meeting with each fund. And it's a great opportunity for advisory committee to look at, well, what's the results of the fund this year? What's going well, what's not going well? Are dollars flying out the door, or are they not? What's happening? And that's where an ongoing investment in the community, I think, can be really helpful, because that helps us as an administrator, or whoever's the administrator, to make sure that they are thinking ahead about, do we need to adapt the fund? I talked about it being a flexible tool, and we mean that. Do we need to adapt the fund? Do we need to grow it? We might find the happy challenge of we're getting too many dollars out the door for the life of the fund, we need to go out and raise some more money. So that's where that advisory committee, I think, would come in. There's probably a good role on the front end to be sure we understand that communities need and with the resources, and then once the fund is launched, that ongoing engagement, which would be really welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Clark? In the various cities you've worked with, what has been the split between what you spend on multifamily rental units versus single-family for sale homes?
So the funds we've done to date have all been for multifamily rental units. On the single-family side, the Durham Fund has one acquisition that was 31 units of single-family housing, so that's a 1 to 4 unit. Most of those continue, and that was a land trust. Most of those continue to be rental properties. Some have gone to home ownership, where they've rehabbed them and gone to home ownership. Was a potential to use another fund. The opportunity is too early to discuss at the moment, but there's potential to use another one of our funds to acquire a large portion of single-family homes. So it's something you could do with the fund. It just we'd have to think about how we do it specifically.
Okay, I would say so far on what the city's worked on, it has been overwhelmingly multifamily rental, although we have done a few single-family projects. But it sounds like, do you think the single-family families are just harder to pull off as far as getting all the pieces to put together? Is that why?
One of the challenges, a lot of single-family developers, so if you're developing new housing, the real need is a developer line of credit. And that's something that, as self-help, we've looked at, and we just don't have the right resources. It's a very challenging product to deploy, and that's where a developer pulls down money, builds a house, sells it, and then pays the money back. And so that constant revolution of funds is tough to do. In terms of the single family, what might prove helpful is if you have a partnership with a community land trust where you're able to acquire properties that perhaps are vacant and need rehab, and you could look at an affordable housing loan fund to assist with that in terms of more rehabilitating tranches of properties that then become available for sale as affordable home ownership properties.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Councilor McIntosh and Councilor Scipio.
So I think we're at an inflection point right now where there's a tremendous amount of support for the city being involved in increasing the availability of housing kind of across the spectrum. But we also know that there's only so much we're going to be able to do in this moment, and that the need is going to continue. When we look at the population growth that we're experiencing and expect an acceleration of that over time, I think we need to be cognizant of having a partnership with a group that is sustainable, and that word gets overused. But I'm interested in what the pipeline looks like for you guys in year over year, whether you're constantly going back to the same CRAs or the same nonprofits. So where does that stream of revenue come from besides just occasional bond issues that we would do?
Right, so the top loss funding is the hardest funding to get. And so that top loss funding, be it from a bond or other funds that a community has, or interestingly, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, really impressed with their approach of gathering donor funds and then bringing a block of funds to that risk capital. So that's the hardest funds to get. The Bank Community Reinvestment Act funds, there's just a lot of money out there. And I don't have a good dollar figure for you, but there's a lot of funds there. These banks have made a commitment to their communities to do something about housing, and so they're looking for opportunities. And so the anecdotal experience I've had is when we've done we've had a funder come to us, and after investing in a fund, that, are you doing this anywhere else? And so to me, that's a very hopeful sign that there continues to be a lot of appetite in that community. We've barely scratched the surface with employers. I think employers, ideally employers will come with the risk capital because it's their employees that are oftentimes benefiting from the funds. But we also recognize some employers may say, well, we have some balance sheet funds, but we can't lose them, so we could come in as a senior lender, so we can't put them at risk. I think there's a huge potential there, particularly as communities connect with their local employers and say, hey, we need you to be part of the solution. So I'm very optimistic on the senior lender side that there's funds available there, and on the community side in terms of bringing in whether it's government or foundation or philanthropic funds on the risk capital.
One of the things that's interesting to me is the fact that, from what I understand, you already have relationships with CRAs and with some of these groups that would take us, time to develop, and that you're a trusted partner with those groups. I'm also interested in the format that Greensboro is using, and where they use you guys to do one portion, yet they keep some control over local funds with their council to do some of their funding from a council-based decision.
I don't have visibility on the split. So in Greensboro, self-help is only administering the gap financing where the risk capital is provided by the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, as where Institute Capital has a separately funded, so parallel fund and complementary product. So the city of Greensboro, the $5 million that went into Institute Capital, they may have other funds they've allocated different ways, and I apologize, I can't opine specifically on that.
But it does seem like, we're here talking about TURN, and we have some programs established, and so we have sort of very close contact with the communities that we're serving on that end, that I think it would take you guys a long time to get into that role versus taking us a long time to sort of get into your role. So I'm interested in seeing sort of a dual track.
Right, it's the Reese's Pieces model here, our peanut butter, your chocolate. It's the idea is that self-help, we're very good at lending, and we have wonderful relationships with both national and regional banking partners, and we've worked with them a lot, and there is a high level of trust, and of course, trust but verify sheet to back that up. What we don't have is we don't have nearly the same advantage that community members and community governments have in terms of connection with their citizens and in use of those dollars. So that's where we really rely on that.
Great, thank you.
Councilman Scipio?
I just have a few little questions about how the trust fund would be structured. And if I'm in error, just correct me. First of all, the trust fund, if we were to go with self-help, we actually put criteria on what we are looking to achieve. For instance, it would support not just established developers, but smaller first-time kind of developers. It would also support single-family homes as well as multifamily, as well as rehab. These are the things that we would structure our fund around, or do you mandate how it should be established?
Well, we certainly don't mandate, but I would say we negotiate. And so I think in going to a community, we understand the needs, and for example, you've listed out some very important needs there, and then we would look and say, what do we have the capacity to do? We would financially model it and say, okay, we think we can bring in these type of funds, get this sort of interest rate, this sort of term for the fund, and is that a good match for what the community has had as a need? So it's a collaborative conversation, and whether it's the organic convening we did with the City of Durham or the request for a proposal with Wake County, both of those have had a lot of discussions, both in the upfront stage and then after the competition's over, and if we've been selected, there are discussions ongoing. Town of Chapel Hill, same way. We've been selected as administrator, and now the work's really just begun to make sure that what we've proposed and what the town of Chapel Hill is looking for is a good match. And so we enter into that humbly because we recognize that we may not be the best administrator for every particular fund, but we're going to lean into it with you to find out, can we serve those specific needs? Is the fund too broad for us, or is it too narrow? What are kind of the parameters that we think is going to be a successful fund?
All right, and do you have a loan committee that reviews applications?
We have our normal process, so we have, I'm kind of on the business development side, So we have a business development team that's going to take intake of prospective borrowers as well as promote the fund. And then once we vet those prospective borrowers and their loans, then we turn over to an origination team, so a loan officer and an underwriter. And those folks then prepare the credit committee package. It goes through our underwriting process and goes before our credit committee. And depending on the size of the loan, we have different members that are required on that credit committee. And then once we issue a commitment, then we go through the loan closing process. So it's a very standard commercial lending approach, and that's by design. We're not trying to do something out of the ordinary. It's a rigorous approach that's worked well and really led to a very a strong institution. And so we want to make sure we're replicating that with the loan funds.
And is there a minimum loan amount or maximum loan amount generally established?
There are different funds. They've ranged from $250,000 to $500,000 in terms of the minimum loan amount. Again, these funds are all focused on multifamily rental. And then on the upper end, $8 million, $10 million, it really depends on the size of the fund. And part of that upper end limit is really designed to say we want to make sure that one project doesn't use all of the funds. So, but that again is a negotiation with the community to really understand. The community says, hey, we don't want an upper limit on this. If someone wants to use all the funds in one great project, we're glad to talk about that. So.
And then how do you determine that you've been equitable across the community and across applications?
I'm sorry, that we've been...
How do you determine that you've been equitable across the community, across applications, across, just to make sure that the fund is actually reaching as many people as possible in the community, not just good credit risk like a commercial bank?
It is... It's a challenge we have to face every day with all of our conventional lending we do at Self-Help, because we're really dedicated to the concept of equity, providing opportunity for ownership and economic opportunity for all as a part of our motto. And so with the loan fund, we're balancing what are the credit underwriting standards we have to maintain to be good stewards of that risk capital, as well as to be sure we can return the capital to the senior lenders. And so that equity piece for me, it's really all about, like good fences make good neighbors. It's really about making sure we have really a good understanding of what the parameters of the fund are and how we're underwriting, what are those underwriting standards. And so that's that's always going to be a challenge, because it's how do we really serve the folks we're trying to serve. I will say that's where I think it is helpful to have an organization as your administrator who has their mission at their core. Because if profit's at the core, that's going to really incent a different set of underwriting standards. But if the mission is at the core, then that's key. So I think that's where, if I'm looking for a fund administrator, that's kind of my top thing on the block. Is I say I can't write a regulation to make every transaction equitable, but I can hopefully find an organization that's going to have equity at its core. So not the most satisfactory answer, but the best we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Wonderful information, and I'm sure we're going to be back in touch.
All right, thank you.
So I assume Ms. Tony just finishes up the section on housing opportunities, or is there additional?
Yes. Tanya was just quickly going to review the benchmark data. I think Mayor Pro Tem brought this up, and we looked at some cities with some models to consider, so that when we present our recommendations, you all can see what other cities are doing. I know Councilmember McIntosh has mentioned the Greensboro model, and we've spent quite a bit of time talking to Greensboro with the Winston-Salem Foundation, connected us with the Greensboro, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. So if Tanya just briefly walk us through some of the other models for you all to consider, but I think Greensboro is the model that we feel most comfortable with.
Absolutely. So I think Charlotte model is what we weren't able to discuss, as it's administered by LISC. And it's, I think, similar to what we're talking about. I mean, it's a foundation that manages and collaborates with the city, and the city staff there also has their own council-driven approved projects as well. So, I think, again, as Ms. Tony stated, Greensboro is the model that we as staff just liked the most, thought that it would be the better approach for our city. And with it primarily is, well, the main reason is the public and private collaboration, bringing in the community with nonprofit, community-based organization to lead the charge, so to speak, in the community, to engage local stakeholders as well as community stakeholders. It just brings everyone to the table and with the committee potentially to outline what type of the criteria that we would like to address, the type of projects to send to a third-party administrator. The other reason I think that even Mr. Freilich mentioned was the quickness that they were able to implement their program. I think once it got going, they were able to raise the capital pretty quickly to begin I saw an advertisement that they're open now. They've opened their loan fund for applications. But in the alternative, or concurrently, let me say, as opposed to the alternative, staff is also recommending that we keep a part of it, because there will be projects that self-help, just based on their underwriting standards, will not be able to loan to, will be unwilling to loan to. They won't meet the criteria, their underwriting criteria for lending. So those are our public projects that one of our council members mentioned, and I agree with, that where there's a public purpose that will be served by supporting a project that may not fit into the box that we establish with self-help or a third-party administrator. So with that, it would mean certainly our federal funds available, but I'm hoping we can consider a dedicated city fund, whatever that source is, in order to fund bridge loans for us as well, which helps to regenerate that income to build a fund for the city, as well as long-term gap financing for affordable rental and home ownership. My understanding is, in working with CRA credits and the underwriting, is that it takes a certain type of project, typically a larger multifamily project, to support the lending structure. So for us, it would be those smaller projects, and again, those that serve the public, as well as home ownership.
So Mayor, just to reemphasize what Tanya is saying, the proposal would be for us to have the trust fund be connected with the community foundation, as Greensboro has done. They can elect to have the support of self-help or third-party administrator, and then that the city continues with the resources that we have through CDBG, home, all of the federal funding that comes in currently to support housing and housing rehab and preservation, and single-family homes that are smaller, either scattered sites or smaller developments. The larger developments that are 100 units plus would be handled through the foundation via self-help or some other third-party entity for larger multifamily developments. So essentially, we would continue the work as a city as we've been doing now, doing smaller gap financing and bridge financing with the federal dollars. We would need a dedicated funding source that can be done through a cent on the property tax rate. It could be done through a housing bond. And so there's some other opportunities for us to generate affordable housing or dedicated housing resources, and then have this separate private entity that's run by a foundation. So that is the proposal.
So that's the recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
Again, I think all of this conversation is very helpful. But again, me voting on any of this, I don't know, because, again, we vote on information, but there is no clear process, flow chart, plan. For instance, if we decide this council votes the majority to elicit self-help, and then we have the piece that we do for smaller projects, single houses, lower loans, I would need to see, I mean, we can vote on it, but don't we have to still come back and vote on the process itself? Okay, then I'm fine with that, because
I see us and this staff approving the concept, and then the staff will fill in the blanks and so on, and have a chance to see it. Councilman Clark and then Councilman McIntosh.
First of all, I don't think we're making any big major voting. This is a committee meeting, not a council meeting today. But anyway, I like the concept. I think we need to recognize that whether it's self-help or anyone else, they have a sweet spot. And I specifically asked them about multifamily versus home ownership. Their sweet spot is large multifamily projects. And by definition, multifamilies tend to be large. You don't build a 6-unit apartment complex. He did say, and I think it was Mr. McIntosh's question, what's the hardest part of it? And he says it's that top tranche, that at-risk tranche. And I am concerned that that at-risk tranche would be city money or federal money that passes through the city, so that would siphon off some of the money we would have available for this others. But I do think, Ms. Tony, I like your concept. I do think we need to maintain the home ownership because that's not something that these folks tend to specialize in. And the other one is, and this gets more to Ms. Scipio's, I don't think they specialize in grants or loans for people fixing up their homes, be it exterior, interior, whatever. And the last one is, we're making a decision for an organization that's not here, I don't think, which is our local community foundation.
They're here.
They're here, okay, well, she said okay, they'll take it. But this is a lot on their shoulders too. And I would like to, one thing we haven't mentioned, the mayor has been out calling on folks in the private sector, and I trust the mayor. I know he's done a good job. He's talked to a lot of people, but it's going to take some of that efforts too. And what he has relayed to me, and as he has to other folks, is there are a lot of folks that are interested in giving loans, and that's that, get back to self-help's thing, that was the green stuff at the bottom, the 50 to 60%, which, and that's where the banks come in with their community reinvestment money, et cetera. So I like the approach. I didn't think we were voting on anything today, I didn't think so.
We're just kind of giving a heads, kind of a nod.
And I'll compliment everybody else. I think Ms. Adams has also commented, there's a lot of clothes we need to put on this mannequin or whatever you call it. The devil's in the detail, but I think we've come up with a good approach, and this is a 4 or 5-legged stool. It's single family, it's home ownership, it's revitalization of existing, it's land banking, maybe a few other in there. Yeah, and so we've got to decide kind of how each bucket's fall and work accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. McIntosh.
So is it appropriate, I know we're not voting on anything, but is it appropriate to direct staff to start an RFP process? Self-help may not be the group, they may be the group, there are others out there, but to put together an RFP that I think, to me, it sounded like we were kind of on board with a 2-track, similar to Greensboro type operation where we retain some control over local dollars spent. Is it appropriate to direct staff to go develop that RFP and get it out?
Good. Councilmember Burke.
Thank you. A couple of questions, and I know that Councilmember Scipio asked this question, but honestly, I really could not hear very well and understand the answer, so here we go. Will self-help have the authority to make decisions without council input if we go with the option that Ms. Tony just suggested?
Yes, they will. It will be based on underwriting criteria as well as target types of projects the community communicates to them. So we'll start out by telling them what we want and what we need in our community, and they'll base their decisions on, those underwriting decisions on that. Is that correct, Mr. Prince?
So, just to be clear, they will have total power over structuring the housing in Winston-Salem.
No, ma'am. That's not what we're proposing. So again, when we start with the criteria that we will direct them, right, our community committee will decide what criteria, what set-asides we need for the types of projects. And then we're also discussing keeping some in-house, for lack of a better word, with the city, where we are also deciding what benefits our city and what projects would better serve us, those smaller projects that may not fit into the box that self-help has, or a third-party administrator.
If you want to clarify, I'll come
Yeah.
back.
Let me just try to clarify just a little bit for council member. We're looking at a variety of different options of how we do a housing program. There's just one component of it, which is a housing trust fund, which typically is looking at tapping into resources that we do not have access to right now. Banks, other folks, foundations, other places, and the Winston-Salem Foundation is willing to partner with us on doing that. If you choose to go down that route, that's a access of a pot of funds that we probably don't have access to now, and they would manage that because those folks would be looking for certain types of returns on those investments. So that we're not even talking about any public dollars. If you want to put public dollars into that, you'd have that option, but this is not even saying that you would do that at this point. This is basically saying, here is a arrow in the quiver that we could use that's been successful in other places, and we're asking, do you want us to pursue moving forward with that model, which would probably not be us doing an RFP, it would be working with the foundation. My guess is the foundation would probably be doing it as an RFP. But as I stated, they would want to have community input up front to make sure that what was being designed as that gap financing was what the community wanted to see happen in Winston. So I don't think it's giving away authority to do that, but it's trying to tap into a set of resources that we currently don't have access to as a part of this. And then council has a lot of other discussion that needs to take place on how we're doing, typically, as was mentioned, single family, scattered site of things that we have, rehab development, how we're going to deal with the homeless issues. So there's a whole series of things that we still need to discuss. But what we're looking for is direction on, are you interested in this concept and us continuing to push that one as part of the trust fund, just as that component.
Thank you. You've made a lot clear for me. Thank you. So just for my own clarification, once again, because this is very important, it's critically important. If we go with the recommendation from ACM Tony, then we are giving the foundation the opportunity to tap into resources that we don't have access to. And it does not come with giving or providing city funds, city resources. We'll continue business as usual with the projects and initiatives regarding housing as we are currently doing and we have been doing. Sounds good.
Until council makes a decision otherwise. I don't think this excludes putting public funds into the trust fund, but it doesn't mandate that either. So that will be a council decision as to whether you want to do that as a part of that, what was talking about, that high level at-risk funding.
Good, Councilman Burke?
I'm good.
Okay, Councilman Mundy?
So the primary customer would be a developer. Is that correct?
On the trust fund? Yeah, I think typically the way these work is that you've got somebody that comes in with a proposal, and again, you're looking at what the structure is that we're interested in Winston. But somebody's coming in with a proposal and saying, we want to do X project, we need financing to make that happen.
theoretically, it probably would be easier on them than it is now, but I think as part of the decision-making process, we probably want to talk to maybe some developers who have used this as a way of financing just to make sure that it is in fact something that they work with well.
Good point. All right, without objection, I'm going to say there's general consensus that we would move forward with putting more, as Robert said, more clothes on this mannequin to bring it forward for a more final approval at some point, along with all the other arrows in our quiver here. Is that good? Is everybody? Okay. All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Tony.
I'm not sure if they're here, but I just wanted to point out, I think Councilmember Scipio mentioned about equity. What Greensboro did with their public resources is partner with the National Institute on Minority Economic Development, referred to as the Institute. You heard, I think JJ mentioned a little bit about it. They ensure smaller minority developers have an opportunity to bid on affordable housing, and they help raise some of the capital for them as well. So they have both. So the foundation is using self-help. The city of Greensboro is partnering with the Institute for that support.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Tony. Councilman Burke.
It's fine. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that today has been very enlightening for me. I don't know about anyone else. I am just very appreciative to ACM Tony, Ms. Skillman, Ms. McClam, Mr. Hunter, Ms. Floyd. You are in a rebuilding state, and I see that you are moving in the right direction. When you are able to point out, and I guess from your internal audit, resources that have been untapped, like the 2014 bonds, like the 108 HUD loans, we're moving in the right direction. And I know you cannot rebuild overnight, but I just want you to know that I appreciate what you have provided. This is the most I've ever seen or heard regarding housing, so I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Burke. Well said. Ms. Tony, Mr. Pate, we've covered a lot of grounds. There's more exhibits in here, but I don't think we want to go through the 200 pages of those. So without objection, Council, I was going to say we've ended the presentations, and you know, we said it wasn't a public hearing, but is there anyone got a burning comment? Let's have someone with the foundation who's going to be helping make this happen. If you would state your name and address for the record, please, and please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes.
Chairman, Council, my name is Elaine Summerfield. I am the Vice President of Community Investment at Winston-Salem Foundation. And I wanted to reiterate what was shared earlier, that the Housing Trust Fund is just one tool that's available to us all. And a really successful housing trust fund for any community is going to be based on public-private partnership. It's possible for nonprofits in the community to get together and create its own housing trust fund, but it won't be as successful unless we have our public sector partners. So thanks for being open to this approach and helping to move this forward. I also want to acknowledge the people that have been working on this issue for a lot longer than I've even been in the community. So partners at Twin City Housing Capital have been pushing to raise the awareness of the effectiveness of a housing trust fund. And I just want to recognize a lot of them are here in this room. Their efforts leading up to this, Winston-Salem Foundation being your community's community foundation, we are well positioned to organize resources, because that's our mission, is to really catalyze and inspire philanthropy to make Forsyth County the place that we want to live, work, and play. So thanks again for the opportunity. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, and we greatly appreciate your willingness to work with us on this project. Thank you. Mr. Montgomery, you've been very patient.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of Council. Durwell Montgomery. My comments today are on behalf of the Affordable Housing Coalition. Mr. John Louder was also a member. He had to leave for another engagement. Conversation today has been amazing, great dialogue, and I hate if my comments bring us down. based on our last conversation, last meeting from the Affordable Housing Coalition. There are just a few things that we wanted to make sure that the council was aware of. And bottom line up front, it centers in urgency and clarity. The urgency of the need around housing and clarity to both the community and staff, hopefully, on what direction the council actually wants to take and engage in when it comes to dealing with housing. As a reminder, this council approved back in 2022 actions to move the community forward when it came to housing, a strategy that was put in place. In early 2023, the city paused those actions, which included much of what the conversation was today around talking about a housing summit, moving forward with housing trusts, identifying partners in community, evaluating capacity of those organizations and agencies to move the community forward on housing. And it was as such to address and move us in a direction where we put more funds out the door. One half of that has happened. The council has done a great job of putting funds and projects out the door, but the city has not begun the process of truly addressing some of the systemic issues in systems and system process. It matters not who's in the role if you have good systems in place. If you have good systems in place, you can move people in and out and the system keeps running. We don't have good systems in place for people to engage. Talking to builders and others who want to identify and build in community, unlike when you go to planning to rezone, you know exactly what you get. You know exactly what you need to do. Engaging with the city is not that easy. Being able to move through the process is not that easy. We have to be able to move us forward in a way that truly makes sure that whoever shows up at the door, whether they're a big builder or a small builder, has a very clear understanding on how to engage, and we lack those systems. And we've talked about this. And the Affordable Housing Coalition and members did the work, provided those things to help us move forward, and kind of at this point, folks are just trying to understand really is there a true urgency, and trying to understand the clarity so that not just the Affordable Housing Coalition, but the broader community can truly engage in a way that ensures that the objectives that the council sets and the broader community are met, and that's having safe, affordable, and equitable housing for all of our community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Does anyone else have a burning statement?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. My name is Arnita Miles. I live at 494 Smithdale Street. I'm put on a new hat today. I am a student at the Winston-Salem State University, and I was given an assignment to attend a city council meeting or committee meeting. I am impressed today. I am thankful today that I live in Winston-Salem. As a student at the Winston-Salem State University, I saw people, elected officials, that are coming with solutions to problems. My paper will be titled, after graduating from Winston-Salem State, Would I Want to Stay in Winston-Salem? I saw the topic of affordable housing. Will there be housing for graduates from Winston-Salem State? I heard the lady talk about homelessness in Winston-Salem. You know, we have homeless students on campus. Did y'all know that? But the lady talked about the $65,000 per house for rehabbing houses. I saw that you are taking problems and trying to find solutions. I thank Ms. Burke for her statements, for her concerns, for her questioning the issues about the self-help projects. That was very good. That let me know that you as our elected officials do care. But, and this is going to be there has to be better communication. If you go on your website, everybody has bios. That's what students are going to look at when we're going to write about you. We're going to write about what is our city council here in Winston-Salem. You know, there has to be a better communication. Right now, there's a lack of communication between, and this is coming from the student, not Dr. Miles. This is coming from the student Are you effectively communicating with your citizenry? Do I want to live here after I graduate from Winston-Salem State? Would you want to live here? So again, I saw some very positive things out of this board today. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. Thank you all for being our elected officials. Communicate better with the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miles. Anybody else in your other organization want to comment? All right. Yeah.
I'll make this very brief. My name is Suzanne Eppermanis, and I am here with some friends from Centenary United Methodist Church, and I just want to say thank you to all of our elected officials, first of all for the service that you provide to our city, but also to share with you our concern that what we really want to lift up is the needs of the community as a whole. And even though one ward, one person, one church member, one coworker may be more or less adversely or beneficially affected by something the council is considering, we are just really hoping and praying that we will all lift the community as a whole, because there is so much interconnectedness, which is what we're learning. There's so much interrelatedness of all of these issues, whether it's poverty or economic mobility or transportation or food insecurity. It's all interconnected. So thank you, and I encourage you to continue to work for the community as a whole, because we will all benefit. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that Centenary is doing in that regard. Without objection, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move to second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye. It's unanimous. We adjourned.